Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be able to give this talk this afternoon, and I'd like to start by thanking the workshop organizers for inviting me. It really is a great pleasure to be here. So I'm going to be talking on moving towards the 1990 treatment targets in rural KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, and specifically speaking on results from the Africa Centre for Population Health. So by way of a brief introduction, we know that the target of 15 million on treatment by 2015 has been achieved. Really a momentous, amazing achievement. However, we still need to dramatically increase that number to achieve the 1990 targets. So I guess the good news is that we've learned to provide ART to essentially the volunteers and able people who can make it to the clinic. I think the bad news is in a lot of settings that we haven't learned how to get people who are not motivated by their sickness, have barriers to accessing care, who don't want to come or don't even know their HIV status. And my talk today is going to be about overcoming some of those barriers and work at the Africa Centre to that effect. So I want to start by giving you just a brief overview of the Africa Centre to orientate you to the epidemiologic and geographic context. So we are based about 2.5 hours north of here in the district of Mkhanyakude. And that grey area that you see there is our HIV surveillance area, where 90,000 people reside at any given time. And every adult in that population is eligible for population-based HIV testing. So we have field workers going out, knocking on doors, testing people for HIV via a pinprick, pinprick. Those red crosses that you see there are the ART clinics where nurses deliver ART. And then just bordering the area is the ANRS treatment as prevention trial area, which Francois Dabi spoke about earlier, so I won't be speaking about that, but specifically about the HIV surveillance I'll be talking about. So this is predominantly a rural community. Here are some typical scenes. It's a very poor community. HIV prevalence is around 29%. It's the second poorest region of South Africa. Very high incidence as well at around 3 new infections per 100 person years. There are pockets of urban and peri-urban populations, quite small, and I'll be speaking about those as well. So we know that ART is having a profound impact on the epidemic. So since the rollout in 2004, if you look at the graph on the top left there's been this spectacular increase in life expectancy. An increase that is literally unprecedented in the history of public health. Coupled with this very exciting finding we're able to publish in Science, showing that high coverage of ART leads to a decrease in the risk of acquisition of infection, even in an imperfect rural program such as we find ourselves in around the Africa Centre. And this graph or that study, I think, really illustrates the power of the data at the Africa Centre. This is now one of the largest incidence cohorts in the world with around 80,000 person years of observation, about 2,700 seroconversions observed to date. And with those numbers, we're able to make very powerful statistical inference. So again, in moving to the 1990 targets, how do we overcome some of those barriers? And we'll be in a really good position to be able to monitor the resultant impact on both mortality and HIV incidence as we move to attain those targets. So our overarching question is how can we interrupt HIV transmission? And the key questions within that is what is the best overall combination prevention approach? Where should we target and who should we target? And for this talk, I'm going to focus on the latter two, where should we target and who should we target? So where are the gaps? So I'm presenting some work here that Noah Harbour and colleagues has done. Presented at PAA last year. And the power of the Africa Centre data is we're able to know who is infected, irrespective of whether the participants themselves know or whether they've linked to care. And from this, you can look at a dynamic treatment cascade, such as shown here. And what you see is over 4 years, this is between 2006 and 2011, at the start, roughly 30% of people knew their status. 4 years later, 75% of people knew their status. So moving in the right direction, so rapid increase over that time period and continuing, but still a long way to go in terms of the targets. Now, if you then use the same approach, so you do a dynamic cohort type approach as opposed to a typical cross-sectional view of the cascade, you see that a typical cross-sectional view will overestimate various components of the cascade. So this kind of approach gives you a much more realistic view of the cascade. And you can see there's still a way to go in terms of the 1990 targets, although this data is 2012. So one of the sort of key issues with the HIV epidemic in this area is kind of the amazing heterogeneity across many constructs. So this is by gender, and the high incidence in young females is one of the greatest challenges that faces HIV. So in this area, if you look at that age group, peaking at nearly 8 new infections per 100 person years at age 24. So really, astronomical incidence in this area. And one of the things that we think is happening is it's these young males with high viral loads who are not accessing care who are infecting these young females. So it's really critical that we get these men, particularly these young men, onto therapy. And if we want to attain the 1990 targets, we need to close that gender gap. So I presented in the start of my talk the life expectancy, and this is now life expectancy increase decomposed by men and women. And you can see that women have benefited to a far greater extent in terms of life expectancy gain following ART. And this again reflects the fact that men are just not accessing care, and it's really important that we close that gap. The life expectancy difference now 9 years. So getting on where and who to target. So I just want to highlight some of these studies. First is the impact of expanding treatment on population viral load. So this study really takes advantage of a remarkable opportunity, and that is to take all the DBS that have been collected to date, perform viral loads on them, and look at the evolution of population viral load across the course of the ART scale-up and into the future. Look at the impact on HIV incidence, and also identify population subgroups that are failing to benefit from ART. Thanks. And so this is some of the population viral load work here. The map on the left there is HIV incidence. Those are our hotspot communities, very high level of incidence. And I've now taken that map and rotated it 90 degrees, looking at the prevalence of viremia. So this is the population viral load work. And what you see is in some of those communities, 25% of the entire population are viremic for HIV. So that's not just the positives, that's the entire population. So reach into there, pull someone out on average, 1 out of 4 will be viremic for HIV. When one is confronted with statistics like that, one begins to get a sense of the magnitude of the problem we're dealing with. Now really an intriguing hypothesis then becomes, to what extent are those communities actually driving the entire epidemic, or a lot of the epidemic? And this is phylogenetic data that we've shown, that we've generated. These are linked infections, so that's a transmission, geography of a transmission event, a putative transmission event. What you can see is a substantial proportion of the transmission events seem to hark back to the hotspots. So giving sort of initial support for this intriguing hypothesis that if we were to really intervene successfully and hit the targets in those communities, we could actually have a substantial effect on the entire epidemic. And there's a lot of work going on in there, and I won't refer to all of it, but a lot of colleagues involved in that. So just lastly, I want to briefly outline an intervention that's going to be starting in 2017, designed particularly to target men and get them into care. So this was a 3-pronged approach intervention. It's essentially a financial incentive to rapid test at home, a subsequent financial incentive to link to care, and then combined with gender-sensitive counseling. And this is powered to detect a 25% drop in HIV incidence. And the real beauty of this sort of approach is it leverages the statistical power going back to 2004 to be able to detect a very small difference in HIV incidence, which is very difficult to do. So just in conclusion, substantial progress made so far, however, a long way to go. And reaching 1990 will require targeting of difficult population subgroups and geographies. To meet the targets, we have to get more men into care. And there's a need to evaluate novel community-based approaches to increase linkage to care, including the use of financial incentives. Thank you very much.